Right, are we up? Okay. Oh, gosh, it's so many people here. Thank you, Alan. It was so nice to see Alan again. We worked so extensively on The Passion for Natural History, the book that went with the exhibition in 2002 to commemorate the anniversary of the founding of National Museums Liverpool by Lord Derby's collection. So we've seen this picture before, but actually the other way around for some reason, that Alan was showing of the 13th Earl in 1837 by William Derby, no relation apparently, shortly after he attained the earldom after his father died. Now in the state dining room, which is that way, and Passion for Natural History was written for the exhibition that we did at the Walker. And just to warn you that I have actually brought down to Knowsley, or rather Stephen, the previous curator, brought down, I think it was 40 copies of the Passion for Natural History that are left, and that is it. So the copies here are the only ones in existence. So if you want one, I'd buy one now before they go. I keep dreading the fact that somebody will ask me to do a second edition because it nearly killed me, the first one. But we'll see. I've got 2 copies myself, and they're completely festooned with bits of paper saying, this is wrong, etc. You know, update this and whatever. So don't believe everything in it. But it is a very good book. So as I say, there was 150 years in 2002 of the foundation of when Lord Derby's collection, the 13th Earl of Derby's collection, was donated to the city of Liverpool, to the people of Liverpool. It very specifically says the people of Liverpool. And we did this exhibition. Alan was very much involved. Several of the people, sadly, who were involved are no longer with us, including, sadly, the chap who did the exhibition, Bill Watson, who died very recently. But it is nice to kind of revisit the time, all the interesting things that we had on display. This is the leaflet we had for the exhibition, showing the Cape Elands, which of course is still here, various other things that are specifically related to Lord Derby, including Lord Derby's opossum, top right, and notice the curl in its tail. I'll be coming back to that later this afternoon. Lord Derby's hummingbird in the middle, and we chose the Joseph Wolfe portraits of some of the animals in the menagerie as the covers, because they just had great eyes. You should always have something with great eyes on the cover of books. Hey, did it. So this was the exhibition itself, very much based on the natural history of interests of the 13th Earl. But there was also much on the furniture that he had acquired at Knowsley. He did have great taste. A lot of the portraits were also on display, a lot of the original pictures that he'd bought. So it covered all his interests. This particular shot of the exhibition, you might be able to see just in the corner there, it says Dear Pig and whatever. So we have got the Edward Lear Owl and the Pussycat story, the rhyme, all the way round. And actually, when the exhibition came down, I couldn't bear to throw that away, and I had it rolled up. In a huge roll, very carefully rolled up, and I have still got that in my attic. I always keep wondering, if I undo it, will it have completely fallen apart? We had a lot about animals that had been in the Aviary Menagerie here, but also about important specimens from Lord Derby's museum itself, so specimens that he'd bought that were already as cabinet skins or mounts. In this, we can see the Lord Derby's eland in the bit in the middle. So that's the tallest, the biggest antelope of all, named after the 13th Earl, and it's Lord Derby's eland, so it was named after him after 1834 when he became the Earl. We have other things that were named after him before he became Earl. So if you can see to the right of the eland, there's three pictures on the wall of a crane. On the left is Edward Lear's portrait of the Stanley crane, which is named after the 13th Earl before he became Earl. And it was one of the most famous things to be bred at Knowsley, even though the chicks never survived very long. And we have two portraits of the chicks by Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins here on the right. Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins, you may also know, he did the dinosaurs in the Crystal Palace down in London. He designed and built those out of concrete. And I know they've been very recently renovated because they were falling apart, and you can still go and see them. So just to say, this exhibition just covered all the 13th Earl's very wide interests. Down the bottom, I think you can just see a bird with a red head, just there, see there. So that's the extinct ivory-billed woodpecker, and I'll be coming back to that picture a bit later as well. Lord Derby's collection just is so astonishingly important zoologically. It's got so many birds and mammals in it that are now extinct, so that we hope one day the genetics that they still contain will help to renovate some of these species. And it does sound like rocket science, that, but it is going to happen one day. But also, they are the original specimens used by people to describe new species. So very important in their own right. So Lord Derby, Alan's said a lot about why he was such a good scientist, why he was so interested in natural history, why he loved Knowsley and he never wanted to go to London. He was complete contrast to his father. This is Knowsley Hall from the west. So when you actually come in, the front of the house, if you like, drawn by Edward Lear during his long stay in 1835. And you can see just the house, a little group of the household at the front. You wonder whether that's Lord Derby's wife, but perhaps she had already died by then. But a little group of children there. There were lots of children in the house because, of course, not only were the 13th Earl's children in the house, but a lot of his half-brothers and sisters from Elizabeth Farren's children. So the house was full of children, which of course led to the nonsense rhymes of Edward Lear, because he was the one who entertained them quite a lot of the time. This is a lovely picture now of Knowsley Hall from the other side. And I love this picture because Edward Lear, I think, used to be rather obsessed by the bit at the end on the left, the kind of balcony bit. And that's always been my favourite thing. If I'm here, I do like to sneak out of the curator's room and sit on the balustrades and watch. And I know Edward Lear painted that actual side quite frequently, and he must have loved it too. So the Aviary Menagerie. So the 12th Earl was quite interested in things like pheasants and things he could shoot, basically. He was very into cockfighting and massacring animals of all sorts. So in a way, his interest, I think, might have led a little bit to the 13th Earl becoming interested in living animals, as well as being a kind of scholarly man who liked to look at cabinet skins and mounts in his own, in the museum-type collections. This is a model of the Knowsley estate in 1851, so the year that the 13th Earl died. In fact, the model's still here upstairs, I believe. It was constructed by a firm in East Liverpool, and I remember Alan and I going there, and Alan climbing into their replica of the Spitfire. So we did have fun making this. The first time they tried making it, they got the dimensions wrong, and it looked like Snowdonia. So they had to start again, and they did make an absolutely great job of it. Just to say some of the places, you can see Knowsley Hall. Sorry, I can't, there's no pointer really. So there's there's very bright blue water, which possibly isn't quite the case, but never mind. So just north of the bottom bit of blue water, you can see Knowsley Hall. And you might be able to see the old wing that got pulled down. So if you go upwards you'll see there's an extra bit of the building which did get dismantled, and that's where Lord Derby's museum was kept. You can also see there's a conservatory coming off it. There was a very large glass house where the 13th Earl had an incredible collection of orchids and other plants. He was very interested in botany as well as zoology. And a little bit north of there, we've got the old Aviary, which is still there, which had a hothouse. And there were various little ponds, like the brewhouse ponds and whatever. And the 13th Earl had a lot of wildfowl of different species that he kept on the various ponds scattered about the estate. And just try not to trip over this. Here is the nest, which is still there, which is the house that housed all the Aviary and Menagerie staff, and they also lived in these little cottages here, because this was a wire cage here, an aviary for all the birds, the big birds usually, that lived in separate pens somewheres in here. These were all pens for animals. There was a bear pit in here. There were kangaroos kept up here. All the llamas, guanacos, antelopes lived down here. This is the old dairy. There were more, I think that's called moss pits. There was more birds and waterfowl in there. The new stables, which actually the 13th Earl built, were full of horses, but also antelopes and other things. This bit's the old Aviary, which is still there, along with, you can see where all the heating apparatus was, quite extraordinary for the time, and the wool garden, which was full of animals as well as vegetables. So it was very much the 13th Earl's interest was living animals. And he had really become interested on his few trips to London. He was right in on the establishment of the Zoological Society of London in the late 1820s. And he became president and was president for the rest of his life, pretty much, of the London Zoo. And this stood him in good stead because if he was wandering around the gardens in London, and saw something he liked, he usually could persuade them to swap it with something else. And I just have sometimes this vision, there were trains in those days, but they were quite new, and these poor animals just kept going up and down and swap as swaps on the train, and they'd come off at Highton Gate and presumably be loaded on a cart and brought here. And it is astonishing, really, that so many of the animals were still alive at the end of that. So, as I say, just the extent of the Aviary Menagerie was incredible. This is in 1851, so at the end, so all this pretty much built by the 13th Earl. And if you, or probably a lot of you will know the wall that goes all the way around the estate, and that was built by the 13th Earl. I think probably to keep people out rather than the animals in, but it had a dual purpose. The present safari park is over to the right, right-hand side of the picture here. This is the old aviary. As I say, it's still there. You can still see the poles, so there would have been a wired aviary in the front, and the heated bit was behind. So a lot of the smaller birds were kept in here, and obviously the ones that needed a heated aviary. And there are lots and lots of lists of all these specimens. Lord Derby wrote everything down. I'll show you a bit later the files that exist of his letters, and little lists and little scraps of paper saying what was in and what had died and what he'd bought. And it is astonishing. It's astonishing how many birds in particular that he had purchased. And it's astonishing, really, how many had survived. He was very much known to breed things in captivity. I think this is, if you think about today and zoos and how much emphasis there is on captive breeding and trying to breed rare things in order to put them back in the wild when you can allow that to happen, when you've got somewhere to actually put them. The 13th Earl was so ahead of his time in how he thought. He did think a lot of the time, I think, that he was breeding animals that would be of use to mankind. So he did do a lot of cross-breeding. He crossbred a lot of the things like zebras and mules and things like that. I'll come back to that a bit later. He did some very weird chicken pheasant crosses, and we've still got specimens of those down in Liverpool in the vertebrate zoology collection in World Museum. These were birds that Lord Derby is the known to have bred for the first time in the United Kingdom. Indeed, the budgerigar is the first breeding known in captivity anywhere. So that's the first budgie, which is still kept in the drawers down in World Museum. All these specimens are. And as you can see, it's got its own perch, mirror. Did have a cuttlefish, but I was told to throw that away. So that was a bit of a shame. Didn't last very long. It had hatched in February 1848. Of course, it was on Australian time because its parents were on Australian time. So it was hatched in February, didn't like it very much and died after 3 weeks. But there we go. So it's the first hatching. And its parents had been sent to John Gould, the famous London-based ornithologist, by his brother-in-law, Charles Coxon, who'd emigrated to Queensland. John Gould sold the parents to Lord Derby, who called them sparrow parakeets, which I quite like. John Gould, I think you were talking about letters and things. John Gould's letters to Lord Derby, there are hundreds of them. John Gould wrote, well, he didn't write, he dictated to his secretary, Edwin, and just constantly this load of letters. Most of them were offering Lord Derby living and cabinet skins for, quite a lot of money. I think John Gould's wealth was quite based on Knowsley, really. But a lot of the specimens of great importance came from John Gould. The bird in the middle is the nene, or Sandwich Island goose. Again, bred by Lord Derby for the first time in history in 1834. Sadly, this is the female on the left and her chick on the right, which she then sat on and squashed. Nenes, if you've met nenes, there are quite a lot at Martin Mere, they're not the brightest spark in the history of man. They nearly became extinct in the wild. They were in their native Hawaii. And at the beginning of the 20th century, they were in terrible. They were down to about 15 animals, 15 individuals. Those he could find were gathered together by Peter Scott, the great wildfowl conservationist, at the Wildfowl Trust in Slimbridge, which he'd founded very recently. He had read Lord Derby's notes on how he'd bred this species, and that is the only reason that you can still get greeted by nenes when you walk into Martin Mere. They're usually wandering around. Otherwise, you would never see those alive. So it's down to the 13th Earl that those still exist. Stanley Crane, I've referred to before, on the right. Again, there were lots of chicks hatched on the estate, but unfortunately they never seemed to survive very well. It is so difficult to imagine now how you would breed things. These are from South Africa, it's much warmer there. How you would try and breed anything that was exotic in those days when you didn't really have the conditions and knowledge that zookeepers now have. But a lot of what people know about breeding animals can be down to the 13th Earl, because he really did think so much about how to breed animals and how to keep them in captivity. And the next one is a specimen, a species that Lord Derby bred here, which is a very sad story. This is the passenger pigeon of North America, now extinct, once known in its millions on migration across the country, decimated by earlier settlers in America who just shot them all. The Earl of Derby had bred passenger pigeons here. He sold one living bird to John James Audubon, the famous American bird artist. When Audubon was here in 1830, Audubon had been staying at Greenbank House, which is now part of Liverpool University, in just off Sefton Park. He'd been staying with the Rathbone family and trying to get somebody to publish his amazing Birds of America, which he had a lot of original paintings of. Audubon didn't seem to know how to scale things down or up, so he basically did birds in their natural size. So he had all these huge pictures that he'd painted, and Lord Derby had heard from the Rathbones about this rather wild American painter, and he came down to Liverpool to actually look at the pictures, and was so entranced by them that he got down on his hands and knees to look at them. And he and Audubon became life for the rest of their lives. They corresponded and Lord Derby was one of the people who arranged and supported Audubon to publish Birds of America, which is now the most expensive natural history book in the world. So if you see a copy, buy it. Or don't. Lord Derby understood that passenger pigeons were colonial nesters. They didn't want to nest, so a pair would not nest on their own. They're a bit like guillemots or kittiwakes, if you see on cliffs. These birds really like to be in great big groups of people. Presumably, it's a kind of defense mechanism. They bred so prolifically and became so tame that they were let out of the cage during the day to fly around the estate. 70 were present when the Earl died in 1851, but they were sold individually or in pairs, and of course none of them ever bred again. So Lord Derby had died. His son was not interested in the menagerie in Aviary. He wanted to be a politician. He became Prime Minister 3 times. And he sold the Aviary Menagerie off as soon as he possibly could. And he didn't care that the birds were colonial nesters. He'd never even taken it in. So they were just sold in individual lots. Audubon published his Birds of America in Edinburgh between 1827 and 1838. Most expensive. I think the last one went for 26 million. A lot of you will probably know Liverpool City Libraries miraculously still have their copy. And it's on display in the Oak Room. It's got its own room, basically. And I think they turn the page every week or something like that. I think they've got their copies in 3 volumes, and they have 1 volume on display at a time with 1 page open. It is a beautiful thing. Lord Derby did have a copy. Unfortunately, it's long gone. It was sold many years ago. What he also had was he bought a kind of do-it-yourself Birds of the World that John Gould had put together. Those days, you didn't have a Birds of the World. There was no such thing. There was no such thing as field guides. So if you wanted to keep a record of what birds there were, you had to make your own do-it-yourself field guide. And that's what John Gould had done. So what John Gould did was buy a load of books and cut them up. And then he would write, and actually this is Edward Prince's writing, his secretary, all the names and when they'd been published and lots of other notes about the bird in question with a picture of the bird, quite often just the heads, so that he could, when he was buying things or selling things, he knew what species they were. And basically, he bought a second copy, because he did have 2, of Audubon's Birds of Australia, were 26 million quid, and had cut it up. So, extraordinary, really. But just to say about a passenger pigeon, how important and how sad that it is lost, even though Lord Derby had so carefully written down how to breed the bird, how best to breed the bird. He hired several artists to come to Knowsley to paint the animals and birds. These are Highland guans, a pair of which became 2 of the 3 syntypes of Penelope niger, which is quite a rare species. It was described to science by Lord Derby's curator, Louis Fraser, in 1852, so just after Lord Derby had died. I'll come back to type specimens this afternoon, but as I said, Lord Derby's collection is really important for 2 main reasons. One is the extinct and very endangered birds that are represented in it. The other is type specimens. So when you describe a new species, you have to base it on a specimen or specimens. And they become the standard for that species. People used to be a bit, very careless about it, but since DNA started coming in, it's become more and more important, because the more DNA is looked at, the more they realise that the current classification of birds is completely wrong. Things like the pigeons are in completely the wrong place. Some of the birds of prey are not actually related to each other at all. Things like fruit bats are not related to ordinary bats. It is now a minefield, and the only way you can keep a track of what species is what species is to have a standard or little group of standards. So I will come back to that later. But these two birds are both the types of that species, and then will continue to be forever. All three, there's another specimen that wasn't in the picture, and they're all still in the type collection down in central Liverpool. Wolfe's painting is still here. So beautiful, beautiful painting. Joseph Wolfe was incredible. He was a German who came over to England, settled here. Probably, in my opinion, Edward Lear, the best animal painter, probably mammal painter too. He's my favourite. I just think he's incredible. If you look, these tiny little birds in the background at the bottom, when you look at the blow-up, you just see how clever it is. I mean, these are tiny little brush marks, and they still look like the bird. It's incredible. Very, very much admire. Wolfe came to Knowsley when he was fairly old himself. Lord Derby had had a stroke. The 13th Earl had had a stroke. This was in the 1840s. Joseph Wolfe had a very thick German accent. Lord Derby had trouble speaking, and apparently they understood each other completely. Another painter, Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins, I've talked about a bit before. This is his painting of the ocellated turkey in the aviary at Knowsley, done a little bit earlier than Wolfe. This is 1843. Painting's still here. Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins' pictures are very much more use in scientifically than Joseph Wolfe's, because Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins not only signs them down the bottom, but he says exactly where he was and what time of day it was and which day it was that he painted the specimen. So you get a much better idea of what was going on and which specimen this actually was and whether it had bred or not. Beautiful thing from Central America. Terribly difficult to obtain. And here is the original in the painting, which is miraculously, I'd found upside down in the cabinet in the Natural History Museum's collection. So not all Lord Derby's specimens are in Liverpool. He'd swapped many specimens around. People had borrowed things from Knowsley, not given them back. I'm talking about John Gould again, and somehow they'd ended up in John Gould's collection and are now in the Natural History Museum. So this was found many, many years ago, as I say, in the cabinet. It had been upside down because it wasn't on a stand, and actually it was easier to keep the specimen from falling over by having it upside down. But you can see it's been beautifully renovated by Hein van Grauw, who's one of the curators at the Natural History Museum. He's just incredibly good at making things look better than they used to be. Of course, the most famous, probably, painter who came to Knowsley was Edward Lear. This is the Orinoco goose of South America, done in 1836. Lear was here through the 1830s, and I know Jenny is going to talk much more about this after break today. This is the original of the plate in Gleanings of the Aviary Menagerie at Knowsley, and I think there's a copy out today for you to look at. So there's 2 volumes, one is birds, one is mammals mainly. Lord Derby decided really he wanted a record of his most favourite and important specimens from the Aviary Menagerie and produced this wonderful book. Volume 1 is all pretty much Edward Lear. Volume 2 is mainly Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins and has a lot of antelopes and things. Again, Lear's pictures are really useful because he always dates them. So you have got a really good idea which specimens you're talking about. And just note the displaying couple over to the right of the plate. There's a blow up here. So these are the 2. This is a pair courting, and they are going to breed. And actually, there are quite a few Orinoco goose chicks in the collection as well. And there is an adult that was bred at Knowsley. So it actually did really well here. And Edward Lear was entranced by this. So you can see this cartoon that he did while he was here. So it's a cartoon of, as I said, there were a lot of people here, a lot of Derbys. So there was the 13th Earl's family and his children, and the 12th Earl's second family. Children, a lot of them were still here. So there were a lot of family to go into one small carriage, and the long-suffering person who's coachman who's riding the horse at the front is going, "Any more? No, please." And I think that is Edward Lear with the funny little glasses looking out the window to say goodbye as well. And if you look at what else is saying goodbye to him, we've got an owl on the left, a crown crane in the middle, and there is an Orinoco goose. And you can see how similar that is to the one on the left in his portrait. So it's displaying to the Stanleys as they leave, but it's saying goodbye and puff, so it's puffed itself up. And it's called Adieu, Adieu to Knowsley. This is in private hands, but we were allowed to use it for the book. Jenny, as I say, is going to talk more about Mr. Lear. This is her fabulous book that she did on Mr. Lear, which I have a copy of here, which I want her to sign. And there has been a continual kind of set of displays on Edward Lear over the years. And the year I started work, which was in 1975, on the collections here, this was a little exhibition that was done at the Walker on Edward Lear. Very difficult now to get this booklet. And I'd just like to mention, how am I doing for time? Anybody? Oh, right, speed up. Just like to mention, don't want to talk too much about Lear because I know Jenny's got lots to say, but I'm doing a bit of research on the weird and wonderful names that Lear invented for his rhymes and stories. Was he inspired by the cacophony of sounds waking him up in the morning, or by the native names he heard from the animal keepers as he sat sketching them? Such names as the Iquatoon, which is the cob, an African animal, antelope seen here, the whiskered yark, the Saki monkey, the Gerolung, which is a squirrel. Other native names Lear might have seen on labels in the 13th Earl of Derby's museum, e.g. on Thomas Whitfield's skins of the Jingi Jonga, which is Lord Derby's eland. And this is a page of Brazilian native names as written by Lord Derby. So there's a list done by his curator on the left, Louis Fraser, so that's the scientific names. And it says classed names at the top. And then we've got the original native names that Lord Derby has added in. And you can see how strange some of these names must have sounded and how Lear might have thought, oh, that's a good name for a rhyme. And the one I like better is Bischarcher down the bottom right there, which is actually the Plains Visharcher. It's still got the same name, which is a rather strange little rodent. Also to say, Lear did a lot of illustrations and cartoons based on flowers and plants. And I think, again, Lord Derby, the 13th Earl, was such a great collector of plant specimens. He had that huge conservatory. These are all orchids with very strange names. You know, Standarplaire, Myxanthus, Dendrobium. You can see the names that Lear might have, thought, oh, I'm going to write a story about the pobbles or whatever. He had, 13th Earl had a lot of other important specimens in his menagerie that were actually living there. This is an Australian echidna, which is notoriously difficult to keep in captivity even now. Mounted specimen now kept down in Liverpool. The quagga, he had quaggas here. They are now extinct. This is one of the many species of zebra. We spent many years trying to track down any specimens of quagga that might have been here. And we think we found this one, which is in the Rothschild Museum at Tring. And it involved me and the curator, Paul, getting into the case. And while we were in there, the conservators said, could you just clean it? So we spent all day cleaning it as well, which was quite fun, with a small hoover. Again, this is one of Waterhouse Hawkins, Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins' pictures done in 1847. So say, species now extinct, so sad that we've lost it. Going back again to Lord Derby's, I think one of his intentions was breeding specimens that would have been of use to mankind. And here he's crossed a wild ass and a plain zebra. Again, a picture done by Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins. He was particularly concerned in such crosses, and he did a lot of crosses between pheasants, chickens, cows, horses, and he produced some very weird-looking animals. But, the thing is how important it is to have crosses and to try and develop animals. And I guess he was also very into what you would say was farming, really, to domestic animals as well as exotic ones. He had all the living examples of the llamoids, the llama family, llamas, alpacas, guanacos, and vicunias. This is the alpacas on the left, painted by Hawkins, and the guanaco on the right. He painted both in the same year, 1844. Llamas and alpacas being probably descended from guanacos and vicunias. Lord Derby had 14 alpacas by 1844. Over 100 more arrived at Knowsley from South America in 1843. And they all had scab, which they gave to all the other llamoids. They all had to be clipped, after which they resembled hares on stilts, and then individually washed with soft soap in big tubs in the brew house. The animal keeper, Thomas Moore, who's our later director of National Museums Liverpool, wrote that they showed their appreciation by violently regurgitating their champagne bottles of spit. Another Joseph Wolfe, as I say, this is my favourite artist, European elk known as moose in North America, done in 1850, so just before Lord Derby died. One male at least was in the menagerie at Knowsley, and this animal chased the coachman up a tree, and he was there all night. So a lot of the animals were quite dangerous. Sadly, when the 13th Earl died in 1851, his son spent no time at all arranging for the menagerie in Aviary to be sold completely. A catalogue was done by J.C. Stevens of London. The animals were hastily listed, and the totals were 318 species of birds, of 1,272 individuals, 94 species of mammals, 345 individuals, were all sold by auction. And as I've said, most of them just went off to different people in separate lots. This is the Illustrated London News plate from that sale. The yak there at the top left, the barasinger or swamp deer, very rare Indian species. The elk you can see with his very depressed keeper who's just picked up the dung, probably. A gnu there, and the zebus. Again, that was a species that Lord Derby had crossed with several of his domestic cattle to produce some very odd-looking things. The Impapufu, I think that's how you pronounce it, another word for lear. That's the Cape Eland, painted at Knowsley in 1846. The 5 Cape Elands were purchased by the London Zoo in 1851, and one was actually photographed there by the Count of Montizon in 1852. So there is a picture, actually a photograph of an animal from those times. Himalayan Monals by Joseph Woolf, fabulous picture. 1851, painted shortly after Lord Derby had died. He purchased a pair in 1846. They bred the following year and for several years after that. At the sale of the living collections in 1851, the 5 birds then at Knowsley were given to Queen Victoria for the Royal Aviary Menagerie. And just to say that Knowsley has continued this tradition of hosting a zoo, although it's in a slightly different part of the estate. So the 13th Earl's vision has carried on with the present Lord and Lady Derby and their staff. Several of the animals that are here are the same as those that lived here in the first half of the 19th century. Safari Park was opened in 1971 by Edward the 18th Earl of Derby and the circus and travelling menagerie entrepreneur Jimmy Chipperfield. Jimmy had opened Longleat Safari Park in 1967 and several others, so Knowsley was one of the earliest ones. Here's the guidebook, and there's the elk that is still here, hopefully not chasing people up a tree. Common eland was certainly on the estate, would draw, painted by Benjamin or Waterhouse Hawkins, are commonly referred to by Lord Derby in his letters. And then there's the vicuna here, and there is actually a skull of a vicuna from the Knowsley Menagerie that died in 1844 in the collections down in Liverpool, and they're still here, so that's nice. And just the last slide, Pear David's deer, not known by Lord Derby. They were discovered much later and nearly became extinct. They were rescued by Pear David. A few were acquired by the Duke of Bedford from Berlin Zoo. He built up a large herd at Woburn, and I think that's where some of the Pear David's deer from here have come from. And just on the right here, the Somali wild ass, critically endangered in northeast Africa. So it is to the credit of the family now that these animals are still being bred, carefully bred, and looked after here. So we do owe them a great deal for that. Thank you very much, and I will come back to this later.